Your role has been eliminated. You can either accept an entry-level job or exit and pay me. The HR reps didn't even look at me, eyes fixed on the beige wall behind my shoulder, avoiding contact like I was already gone. 2 decades of dedication, condensed into a 15-minute meeting void of decency. I swallowed hard. Can I have until tomorrow to decide? My voice cracked under the weight of everything: my mortgage due in 3 days, my mother's care facility, the life I had built around this career. For 20 years, I had been the quiet engine behind the firm's growth. While others clocked out early for school plays and long weekends, I stayed back, nurturing prospects, building trust, driving results. I'd helped turn a floundering regional agency into a respected national force. Each winter, leadership toasted to rising profits, profits that bore my fingerprints. That night, a former colleague sent me a message: "Heard what happened. Just so you know, your job wasn't eliminated. The CEO's nephew starts Monday." Before I walk you through how I turned that betrayal into the most rewarding act of my professional life, let me say this isn't just another workplace revenge tale. This is about reclaiming worth when others pretend not to see it. If you've ever given everything and been discarded anyway, this story is for you. Stay to the end, because what I did didn't just salvage my pride. It shifted the balance of power in ways they never anticipated. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Your support helps us keep sharing real stories about people who took control when the world told them they had none. My name is Everly Quinn. In my professional circle, I've always been known as the fixer, the person who calms tense clients and solves problems others run from. My reputation wasn't built on flash or charm, but on tireless effort and authentic care. My coworkers joked I could sell a raincoat in a drought, but my edge was never salesmanship, it was consistency. I showed up early. I followed through. I made people feel seen. Outside of work, I lived quietly. My small house by the lake was cluttered with thrift store mugs and a garden I never quite tamed. I never married, not because I didn't want to, but because the job always came first. I told myself that career stability meant freedom. Besides, I had Winston, my rescue pup, who greeted me each night like I'd just returned from battle. Looking back, the warning signs were all there. Missed meeting invites. Strategic conversations that happened on golf courses instead of conference calls. Account updates routed around me, even though I'd handled those clients for years. But when your self-worth is so tightly tied to your job, denial is a sedative. I convinced myself they were accidents, not exclusion. The morning it all unraveled began like any other. I arrived just after 7 a.m., well before most staff, and reviewed quarterly numbers, prepping for client calls. At 10:30, I walked into a meeting with HR. Patrice was there. So was our legal counsel, a man who'd barely acknowledged my existence for years. No handshake. Just a folder and a sentence: "Your role has been eliminated." I sat frozen as they explained that the only alternative was a junior position at a fraction of my current salary, a 62% pay cut. My mortgage, my mom's facility, basic bills, it would all collapse. Patrice added, "This has nothing to do with your performance." As if that softened the cruelty. "The company is restructuring," she said. "Restructuring usually involves notice," I replied, holding my voice steady. "Severance, transition plans." "This is the transition," the attorney replied coldly. "We're offering you employment when we're not required to." I wanted to scream. Instead, I requested 24 hours to think. Back at my desk, I saw the writing on the wall, literally. Coworkers avoided eye contact. My access to files had been cut. I couldn't even open the client databases I'd spent years maintaining. I packed a few keepsakes, an old plant, a thank you note from a client I'd helped during a crisis, and walked to my car, numb. Behind the wheel, I couldn't cry. Instead, a strange calm settled in. I opened my contacts and dialed a number I'd never used for personal matters, Devin Aldridge, CFO at Midwestern Financial Partners. I had built that $15 million relationship from the ground up. Our account was now the cornerstone of the firm's reputation. Everly? Devin picked up on the second ring. Everything okay with the Q3 review? I hesitated. Actually, I'm calling with a personal update. My position was eliminated today. He paused. Really? Why? Restructuring, I said. Another silence. Where are you now? In the company lot. Don't move. I'll be there in 20. I didn't ask why he cared. After all, over the years, we'd built something solid, more than vendor-client protocol. We'd faced regulatory shifts, economic dips, and policy changes together. There was mutual trust, even friendship. 23 minutes later, his sedan pulled up beside mine. He waved me toward a cafe across the street. Over untouched lattes, he confirmed my suspicions. The CEO's nephew, Griffin Harding, was being groomed to inherit my client base. He'd already met with several accounts. He's enthusiastic, Devin said delicately. But green. Spent most of lunch name-dropping. When I asked about the custom reporting system you built, he suggested we scrap it and use the company's generic platform. A flicker of satisfaction ran through me. That reporting system had taken months, designed specifically to meet Midwestern's regulatory framework. It had been one of many personalized touches that deepened our business ties. Here's what matters, Devin said. Our contract's up for renewal in 60 days. We've had 3 competitors approach us in the last month alone. The only reason we haven't entertained them is because of you. I blinked. Devin, I'm flattered, truly. But let me finish, he said. We're expanding. 2 acquisitions next quarter. Bigger footprint, bigger needs. We've debated whether to increase services with your firm or bring the function in-house. He leaned forward. I'd like a third option. You. As a consultant. Start with the transition. We'll see where it goes. I blinked again. You want me to leave and take your business with me? He shook his head. I want to hire the person who's been delivering results. What happens with the firm's contract is up to our board. But we take input seriously, especially from trusted advisors. That night, I sat on my porch, wine in hand, Winston chasing moths through the grass. My phone buzzed. Messages from coworkers, some kind, others clearly fishing for gossip. One stood out. Tamar, our receptionist, had written, they moved someone into your office already. Fancy gift box and everything. Nameplate says, Griffin Harding, Senior Client Director. Thought you'd want to know. So now it was official. He hadn't just taken my job, he'd been given a promotion I was never offered. I had 3 options. I could accept the demotion and cling to a paycheck while searching for new opportunities in silence. I could walk away completely, resume bruised, pride dented. Or I could take Devin's offer, leverage the trust I'd earned to build something of my own. The last option felt ethically murky. I had always prided myself on integrity. On earning trust, not weaponizing it. But as I watched Winston curl up beside me, I realized something. I didn't owe them my silence. Not after how they had erased me. The next morning, I made my decision. And the first call I made wasn't to HR, it was to a lawyer. Because if they wanted to treat me like I was disposable, then they had no idea just how valuable I had always been. Using a client relationship to advance my own career had always felt like a boundary I would never cross. But as darkness settled that night and I reviewed my bank account, calculating how long I could last without income, my perspective began to shift. The company hadn't hesitated to toss aside 2 decades of dedication. They weren't just eliminating my position, they were actively rewriting the history of the client relationships I had cultivated, scrubbing away my fingerprints. So, was it truly unethical to continue working with a client who respected my expertise, no matter what logo was on the front of the building? By dawn, I had made up my mind, but not in the way Devon had expected. I arrived at the office at my usual early hour and sent a short, polite email confirming I would accept the administrative role they had offered. Responses came quickly, tinged with confusion. HR replied with vague congratulations. My former supervisor's message was short and clearly unsettled. No one had expected this outcome. They had likely counted on me to leave in outrage. Walking into the admin department, I could feel the air shift. Younger employees stared, whispered. Why would someone with a management background step so far down the ladder? My new supervisor, a competent woman more than a decade younger than me, awkwardly laid out my duties, constantly interrupting herself with reassurances that, you probably already know this, but procedure requires I walk you through it. My plan was simple: remain visible and gather intelligence. With my new position, I retained legitimate access to the premises, to certain company systems, and most importantly, a front-row seat to Griffin Harding's handling of the Midwestern financial account. I needed to see his approach firsthand before I made my next move. That same afternoon, I called Devon. I'm accepting your consulting offer, I told him. But I've also decided to stay on at the company in this new capacity, for now. There was a pause. That's unusual, he replied. May I ask why? I want to ensure a smooth transition, I said. Midwestern deserves continuity, and I want to make sure your team's needs are understood and documented for whoever takes over. Devon didn't seem entirely convinced, but he didn't challenge the explanation. When could you begin consulting with us? I can start after hours immediately, I said. We'll be careful about boundaries. Of course, Devon replied. I could hear the respect in his voice. He understood strategy when he saw it. Over the next 3 weeks, I led a dual existence. By day, I performed clerical tasks with precision and grace. I arrived early, stayed late, and carried myself with cheerful professionalism, disarming those who expected bitterness or resentment. By night, I met with Devon and his executive team, providing detailed analyses of their service contract, mapping out every customization and process I had created over the years, information that existed mostly in my head or in informal notes, never properly archived. At the same time, I closely monitored Griffin's management style. As Devon had warned, he was all bravado, light on substance. His efforts were performative, driven by appearance rather than understanding. He made rapid decisions to modernize systems he didn't understand. He scheduled meetings at inconvenient times for the client, and dismissed feedback from the account team, professionals who had worked side by side with me for years. The most serious misstep was his decision to dismantle the custom reporting system I had designed for Midwestern. He insisted on transitioning them to the firm's standard platform to showcase upgraded features and simplify operations. But what no one had captured, because it had evolved through years of hands-on collaboration, was that the custom system wasn't optional. It was necessary. Midwestern's portfolio required highly specific regulatory compliance tools, and without them, their data tracking became unreliable. When those issues began surfacing, missed flags, flawed reports, Griffin dismissed them as temporary glitches in migration. The account team tried to raise red flags, but he brushed them off. For weeks after my reassignment, Devon requested an urgent meeting with our senior leadership. The topic: serious concerns regarding service quality. It was set for Monday at 9 a.m. Griffin seemed unfazed. He reassured the team with clichés: clients always get jumpy during change, I'll smooth it over. But Friday afternoon, I received a surprise calendar invite from the CEO's assistant. The subject line read, Midwestern Financial Discussion, and it included my name, Griffin's, and the full executive team. It seemed someone had finally remembered I might still have something useful to offer about our largest client. I spent the weekend preparing, not for the meeting itself, but for what I intended to do afterward. I revisited my consulting agreement, verified that my non-compete only applied to direct competitors, not individual clients, and polished the strategic plan I had developed with Devon's team. Monday morning arrived with a charged stillness. I chose my outfit carefully, professional but understated. When I walked into the executive boardroom, the conversation came to an immediate halt. The CEO's eyes narrowed in confusion. "Everly," he said, tone neutral, "I wasn't aware you were attending." "I received an invitation," I replied calmly, and took my seat. Before he could respond, Devon walked in, flanked by Midwestern's general counsel and their COO. The mood in the room shifted instantly. This was no casual check-in. These were high-ranking decision-makers, and their presence made it clear this was serious. After introductions, Devon got straight to the point. "We've called this meeting to address major concerns with your company's service delivery," he said evenly. "Over the last month, we've experienced system disruptions, missed compliance deadlines, and a lack of responsiveness." Griffin jumped in quickly, offering hollow reassurances. Devon didn't even glance at him. "More than the technical issues," he continued, "we're disturbed by what appears to be a complete loss of understanding of our operating requirements. Our reporting framework has been removed, one that was vital to our regulatory processes." The CEO leaned in, clearly annoyed. "Griffin's team has been implementing our latest enterprise platform. Some turbulence is normal during these kinds of upgrades." Devon didn't flinch. "We were never informed of any such upgrade. And from our perspective, the existing system wasn't broken." Griffin chimed in, confident as ever. "Sometimes progress requires change, even when things seem to be working." This time, Devon looked directly at him. "Mr. Harding, the system that was replaced wasn't outdated. It was custom-built to meet our legal obligations. It required deep knowledge of our operational model, something built by someone who took the time to understand it." He turned his eyes to me. "Isn't that right, Everly?" Every executive at the table turned to look at me. I kept my voice steady. "Yes. That system was updated regularly to stay aligned with evolving regulations. In some areas, it was more advanced than the platform it was replaced with, particularly around multi-state compliance tagging." The CEO stiffened. "If you had concerns, you should have raised them formally." "With respect," I replied, "I no longer had oversight of that account. No one consulted me on the changes." A long silence followed. Devon used the pause to slide folders to each executive. "We've conducted a full review of the current agreement and prepared proposed changes. After recent developments, we no longer believe the existing terms support our needs." The CEO's face paled as he read. This would mean a major restructuring of our partnership." "That's correct," Devon said. "We're unbundling several services we feel can be managed elsewhere." What he didn't say, but what was clearly outlined in the documents, was that those services would be handled by me, as an independent consultant, for far less than the firm had been charging. Griffin flipped through the pages, eyes widening as he did the math. The contract value would drop by nearly 40%. Devon nodded. "We believe this better reflects the current level of value delivered." The executives exchanged tense glances. The CEO's face tightened. Then he spoke. "Perhaps we were too quick with some of our changes. Everly clearly possesses key institutional knowledge. We'd consider reinstating her former position to support service continuity." This was the moment I had anticipated. The moment they would try to pull me back in. Devon glanced at me, silently asking, "Is this what you want?" I kept my expression neutral. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I believe the company made it clear that my skills are best suited to administrative support." I'm happy to contribute however I'm needed. A flash of confusion passed over their faces. They hadn't expected that. They had counted on me leaping at the chance to reclaim what they had taken. Devon picked up seamlessly. We've already established plans for the transition services. We're prepared to move forward on the new terms. The meeting concluded with tense agreements to review the proposal further. But the damage had been done. As the executives broke into small clusters, whispering among themselves, I stood and gathered my things, ready to return to my modest desk, my quiet position, and the next chapter one had already begun building on my own terms. Afterward, I quietly returned to my administrative desk. By the end of the day, word had spread like wildfire across the company. The potential fallout from losing 40% of revenue tied to one of our largest accounts had set leadership into a tailspin. By evening, the CEO's assistant scheduled a private meeting for the next morning. I walked in expecting some form of reinstatement. What I got instead was more telling. The situation with Midwestern is unfortunate, the CEO began, seated behind his commanding desk. Griffin may have acted too swiftly in implementing system changes, that can be corrected. But what concerns me more is the timing of these issues, aligning a bit too perfectly with your transition. I kept my expression composed. I'm not sure what you mean. Devon Aldridge specifically requested your presence in yesterday's meeting. He referenced systems you built. Their restructuring proposal includes technical frameworks that closely resemble your work. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Have you been in communication with Midwestern outside official company channels? I responded calmly, as I mentioned during my transition, I've always maintained professional rapport with our clients. Devon reached out after hearing about my change in status, which isn't surprising, given our long-standing relationship. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. And what about the consulting role outlined in Appendix C of their proposal? The one where they plan to bring on an independent advisor to rebuild the same systems we're currently charging them premium rates to maintain? I met his eyes. I wasn't aware of the exact contents of their proposal. My access has been restricted to administrative tasks since the transition, as you know. He didn't believe me. That was clear from his face. But he had no evidence to suggest I had done anything unethical. My consulting agreement with Devon had been deliberately structured to begin only after Midwestern's revised contract was finalized. Everly, his tone shifted, softer, almost earnest. We've worked together for many years. I've always appreciated your contributions. Maybe we acted too hastily with the restructure. Your knowledge is invaluable. What would it take to resolve this, amicably? I wasn't surprised by the negotiation, just by the timing. I'd expected them to try to repair the Midwestern relationship first. I'm not sure what you're asking, I replied, keeping my expression neutral. He sighed, clearly frustrated. Let's be candid. You built the Midwestern relationship. They trust you. We need that relationship to stay intact. Tell me what you want. For a brief moment, I let myself imagine saying yes, returning to a leadership role, maybe even with a more prestigious title, a higher salary. Walking back through those doors not just as an employee, but as someone who had been publicly validated. But then I remembered the meeting with Patrice and the general counsel. I remembered being told that 20 years of service meant nothing. I remembered the CEO's nephew claiming my office before I had even cleaned out my personal effects. I remembered holidays missed, working through illness, answering urgent client emails at dawn on Christmas Day. I appreciate the discussion, I said, rising. But I should return to my responsibilities. The quarterly supply inventory is due by end of day. He stared at me, genuinely stunned. You're turning down the opportunity to reclaim your position. I'm honoring the company's initial judgment about where my skills are best utilized, I answered. If there's nothing else, I need to get back to those spreadsheets. I left him sitting there, struggling to process my refusal. It wasn't revenge. It was something far more difficult for him to grasp: indifference. Over the next 2 weeks, the tension across the company grew. Midwestern moved ahead with their contract revision, despite increasingly frantic attempts to salvage the relationship. Griffin launched multiple initiatives trying to demonstrate the superiority of our standard systems, each one unraveling due to his lack of understanding of Midwestern's compliance needs. Meanwhile, I executed my administrative duties with calm precision. Former team members began inviting me to lunch again, as though rediscovering my value. I answered questions about Midwestern's needs truthfully when asked, never volunteering extra insight, but never hiding it either. In the evenings, I worked on my next chapter. Devin and I finalized a consulting framework that would allow Midwestern to cut their service costs by 40% while preserving full functionality. It would provide me an income on par with my old salary, but with more free time and a better quality of life than I'd known in 2 decades. 3 days before Midwestern's board vote, Griffin approached my administrative station. He looked strained, his confidence chipped away by the last few weeks. "I need your help with Midwestern," he said, skipping pleasantries. I looked up from my screen. "How can I assist?" "The reporting tool you built, they keep referencing customizations that aren't documented anywhere. We need to recreate those features using our standard platform before their board meeting on Friday." I had been expecting this. "I'd be happy to walk you through the system architecture. When would you like to meet?" His expression lifted slightly with relief. "Now, if you have time. I've reserved a room." For 4 hours, I carefully guided Griffin through the system I had designed, every customization, every workaround, every nuance tailored to Midwestern's specific needs. I answered each of his urgent questions calmly and clearly. It became increasingly obvious that these features weren't something you could just recreate in a few days, or even weeks. They were the result of years of adaptation built on deep, evolving knowledge of the client's ecosystem. As the session ended, Griffin looked at me with something close to awe. "You built all of this yourself?" he asked. "Over time?" "Yes, in close collaboration with their compliance team," I said. He shook his head slowly. "And I dismantled it in 3 weeks." For the first time, I felt a hint of empathy for him. He wasn't unintelligent, just inexperienced, and too self-assured to know what he didn't know. "These systems can be rebuilt," I offered, "if the real requirements are understood." He gathered his things slowly, visibly drained. "The board meets Friday. Even if I work non-stop, there's no way to get this back in time." I said nothing, just nodded. At the door, he paused. "Why'd you help me today, after everything?" The question felt honest, maybe our first truly honest exchange. "Because you asked," I replied, "and because client needs have always come first for me." He held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded and left. The next evening, I received a call from the CEO. "Midwestern's board meets tomorrow," he said, skipping formalities. "Griffin tells me you've been helpful, but the contract cut still seems imminent." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said evenly. "We're submitting a counteroffer, full reinstatement of your prior role, with a significant pay raise. Director level. Equity participation." I hadn't expected that. "Not in full. Not the equity." "That's very generous," I said. "We value loyalty, Everly. Your knowledge is irreplaceable." The irony was almost suffocating. "And Griffin," he added, "will transition to a senior role focused on new business, not account management." It was everything I'd ever worked toward: recognition, authority, security. All I had to do was convince Devin to maintain an overpriced service package his company no longer required. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I don't think I can change Midwestern's decision at this point. Their analysis seems thorough." A pause. "Then, I see. Well, good luck with whatever comes next." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, but I no longer cared. The admin role had never been the destination. Just a bridge. The next morning, I submitted my resignation, effective immediately. I packed up my few belongings and walked out for the last time. Tamar, the receptionist, smiled knowingly. "They're all in the conference room," she whispered. "Midwestern's board is delivering their decision by video." I nodded, thanked her, and stepped outside into a bright spring morning. For the first time in 2 decades, I had no place I was required to be. I drove to the lakeside park where this chapter had quietly begun 5 weeks earlier. The air smelled of blooming grass and new beginnings. I followed the walking trail along the water, my phone untouched in my pocket. Company email had been deleted earlier that morning. At precisely 10:30 a.m., when I knew Midwestern's decision would be announced, I sat on a bench overlooking the lake and let the emotions rise, the pain, the dismissal, the fear of starting over. They surged through me but didn't shake my clarity. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Devin. "Decision delivered. Call when you can." I gave myself another 30 minutes of stillness before making the call. Devin picked up. "It's official," he said. The revised service agreement was officially approved, cutting total fees by 40% and unbundling the offerings, just as we had planned. "How did they take it?" I asked, unable to hide my curiosity. Devin chuckled. "Not well. Your CEO tried to make a last-ditch offer to reinstate the custom reporting system, but our tech team was firm. The expertise had quite literally walked out the door." I couldn't help but smile. Our new consulting arrangement had been approved unanimously. "You can start Monday if you're ready," Devin added. "I'll be ready," I replied confidently. The weeks that followed carried a completely different rhythm than my old life. I worked side by side with Midwestern's technical team, rebuilding the custom reporting system from scratch. But this time, we included extensive documentation and training protocols to ensure institutional knowledge wouldn't vanish with one person's exit. The work was both demanding and deeply fulfilling. What surprised me most, however, was the balance. Rarely did work spill beyond reasonable hours. For the first time in years, my evenings were my own. I joined a community garden. Took Winston to obedience classes on the weekends. Reconnected with family who had grown used to my perpetual absence. 3 months into the consulting role, Devin invited me to lunch at a restaurant overlooking the financial district. Through the towering windows, I could see my old company's office among the skyscrapers. "Quarterly earnings came out yesterday," Devin said as our meals arrived. "Your former employer reported a 22% drop in revenue. Their stock fell nearly 30 points by afternoon." I nodded, sipping my water. Not surprising, given the contract changes. "There's more," he continued. "Griffin Harding resigned last week. He's going back to grad school." That caught me off guard. "That's probably for the best," I said thoughtfully. "He has potential, given time and the right mentorship." Devin studied my face. "You don't seem particularly gratified by all this. Most would call this a textbook revenge story. The undervalued professional takes down the company that cast her aside." I considered that. That was never my intent. I just knew what I was worth, and when they failed to recognize it, someone else did. The 40% contract reduction wasn't about retaliation. It was an honest evaluation of what Midwestern truly needed. I would have recommended the same strategy if I were still working there, though I doubt anyone would have listened. Devin smiled. "That's exactly why our board approved your consulting role without hesitation. Integrity is a rare currency in this field." As lunch drew to a close, he revealed the real reason for our meeting. "We're planning to bring the reporting system in-house permanently. The board approved a new position, Director of Regulatory Systems. You'd report directly to me and oversee a team of 4 specialists. I raised an eyebrow. You're offering me a full-time role. Yes, he said. With a salary roughly double what you made before. Given how critical compliance infrastructure is to our operations, and the fact that we've seen firsthand how much more efficient you are without the pressure of 80-hour weeks. It was an offer that ticked every box. Still, I paused. Can I have some time to think? I asked. Consulting has given me a kind of freedom I'd never had before. Take all the time you need, Devon said warmly. This role was designed with you in mind. But if you choose to keep your independence, we'll respect that. That evening, I sat on my porch, watching Winston dart after fireflies in the fading light. I reflected on everything that had happened. The company I had dedicated 20 years to was unraveling without me. The consulting work I was doing now offered greater income with far less sacrifice. And Midwestern's offer represented the kind of acknowledgement I'd never received in my former role. But the real transformation wasn't about titles or paychecks. It was the realization that my value was never theirs to define. My experience, my skills, the relationships I built, those were mine, no matter where I worked. That fleeting urge for revenge I'd felt in the early days after my demotion now seemed hollow. Their struggles didn't bring satisfaction. Griffin's departure stirred more empathy than victory. Even the CEO's desperate offer felt more tragic than redeeming. What brought me peace was building a new life, one that respected both my talents and my boundaries. Being forced out had been painful. But in doing so, they freed me from constraints I hadn't realized were holding me back. A week later, I accepted Midwestern's offer, negotiating in some flexible work arrangements that had become essential to my well-being. On the day I signed the contract, I drove past my old office building. The logo still gleamed on the upper floors, though I'd heard whispers of downsizing and a possible acquisition. I felt no anger, no triumph. Just a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes the things we lose open the path to who we were always meant to be. 6 months later, the news became public. My former company had been acquired by a larger player in the industry. The CEO had stepped down. The sale price marked a 50% drop in valuation compared to the prior year. The article cited the loss of key client accounts as one reason for their decline. A small photo showed cardboard boxes being hauled from the executive floor where I had once spent most of my adult life. Devon forwarded me the article with just a single question mark in the email body. I replied simply, every company reveals what it truly values by the choices it makes. Some don't realize until it's too late that relationships and institutional knowledge can't be replaced by nepotism and titles. That night, I hosted a dinner party, something I'd never had time for before. Friends from the community garden mingled with my colleagues from Midwestern. Laughter and conversation filled my modest lakeside home. In that moment, I understood something deeply. The most powerful way to reclaim your worth isn't revenge. It's building a life that reflects it, especially when others failed to. If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated despite your dedication and excellence, I hope you remember this. Your value is not diminished by someone else's inability to recognize it. The most satisfying response to those who undervalue you isn't bitterness. It's success they can no longer reach. Have you experienced a betrayal that led you somewhere better? Share your story in the comments. It might be exactly the encouragement someone else needs to believe in their worth again. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Each week, we bring real stories of people who found strength when everything seemed to fall apart. Sometimes the most ordinary lives hold the most extraordinary wisdom.